Just a couple of announcements before we begin. After Professor Alexander's lecture, there will be a little break in time. There's refreshments that are out in front. You probably noticed as you came in. The library requests that you not bring them into the actual library so that we don't have visiting creatures that devour more than the cookie crumbs. So please help yourself to that. And there'll be a very brief break. Then we'll reconvene you back here for the question period. We at St. John's are fortunate to be steeped in ancient as well as modern mathematics, which plays such a large role in our program. Implicitly and sometimes explicitly, we are therefore also immersed in the history of math, which we tend to consider directly through its seminal works, beginning with Euclid's Elements. We are therefore very lucky to be able to learn this evening from a historian who's done a great deal to help us understand the larger social, political, and even religious dimensions of mathematical works that in themselves do not refer to or consider these dimensions explicitly. Amir Alexander received his bachelor's degree in math at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, and then received his doctorate in the history of science at Stanford. He is adjunct professor of history at UCLA, and his 5 books show his deep and lively engagement with many facets of mathematics and its relationship to modernity. Let me read the titles of his books, and you'll see what I mean. Beginning with Geometrical Landscapes, The Voyages of Discovery, and the Transformation of Mathematical Practice. Then Duel at Dawn, Heroes, Martyrs, and the Rise of Modern Mathematics. And then the book that concerns us this evening, Infinitesimal, How a Dangerous Mathematical Theory Shaped the Modern World. Then Proof, How the World Became Geometrical, and most recently, published last year, Liberty's Grid, A Founding Father, A Mathematical Dreamland, and the Shape of America. We will be hearing this evening about the work he described in Infinitesimal, a book that is filled with connections between math and its contemporary context, stories that Amir Alexander tells so insightfully and so engagingly. Please welcome him as he tells us about Euclid versus the invisible, the mathematical battle over the shape of modernity.
Well, thank you, Peter. Thank you so much. I've known Peter for many years, and it's really a pleasure to see him again, and pleasure to be here. So thank you, faculty of the college, and for the invitation. Yeah, my topic, as you see, is about Euclid versus the indivisible. And I would like to start with a little story that dates from quite several centuries after the events that I will discuss today. So, in 1842, a great mathematician by the name of Carl Gustav Jacobi, he was invited to give an address to the British Association for the Advancement of Science that was meeting in the city of Manchester. And after he came back, he wrote this letter to his brother, telling them, kind of in the tone that, I told them that it is the glory of science to be of no use. Now, this is what Manchester looked like when Jacobi was addressing them about the beauty and purity of mathematics. And as you can imagine, he didn't make many converts that day. These were people who were there, it was Britain of the Industrial Revolution, and they were interested in science actually to build factories and machines and so on. But he does rate, it did actually, his position was actually quite popular with other mathematicians of his day. For example, and has remained since. For example, he wrote to the great French mathematician Legendre that mathematics is for the honor, the purpose of mathematics is the honor of the human spirit. Later on in 1940, G.H. Ardie, another great British mathematician, who wrote an apology for mathematics, and he also thought that mathematics was basically useless, that mathematics should be valued as art, if it is to be valued at all. Okay, now mathematics is simply for the beauty and the perfection, and it is what it is. It's not a tool. It's just for its own sake. Now, if mathematics is what Jacobi thought and what Hardy thought, well, that's no small thing, right? Because anybody who has done mathematics, engaged with mathematics, can see the beauty of mathematics and this pleasure that you get when that aha moment, right? When you suddenly understand something, when you grasp something, when you see something. There is something enormously beautiful about that, and not at all trivial. But nevertheless, is that really truly what mathematics is? What is mathematics actually good for? Is it just for its own beauty, or is it does mathematics actually matter? Or is it just a beautiful game? And part of the answer is very easy, and I think the people who were listening to Jacobi in Manchester actually were very well aware that mathematics is actually important. It is useful for doing things, for building things, for whether building machines or building, going to Mars or building cell phones or whatever. All those things, all this technology that is all around us, that is so much part of our world. But so certainly, Jacobi would never deny that mathematics can be enormously useful for many things. But if we're honest, then that is part of mathematics. But there are vast areas of mathematics that are not really useful. In fact, Hardy himself, he claimed that all the interesting that there are parts of mathematics that you can do things with, but those are the boring, silly parts of mathematics. The really interesting things are the ones where they are simply useless. And he was right in many ways, because there are large areas of mathematics that are not really useful. I mean, if you think about it, even ancient mathematics. I mean, how often have people made use of Archimedes' proof of the area enclosed in a parabola? Perhaps, but I'm not sure when. Or Cantor's transfinites, fascinating, inspiring, but useful, hard to say. Or more modern mathematics, the Langlands program. Was it ever used for anything actual? Did it actually matter? And I think for the most part, Jacobi was right. Math, at least large parts of math, are in fact completely useless. Now, what I propose to do in this talk is look at a different way that mathematics matter, because I think mathematics does matter, both for its beauty, but also for other things as well. And it matters not just as a tool for doing other things, but it matters because it is a way of organizing the world. It is a way in which people understand the deepest order of things, the basic order of the way things are. And if that is the case, then mathematics actually matters enormously, because the kind of mathematics that we adopt, the kind of mathematics that we use, the kind of mathematics that we accept as authoritative, actually says a lot about what we think about the natural order, but also about how we organize our lives, how we organize our societies, our political structure, sometimes our religious structure. Mathematics is the deepest order of things, and what we believe about the deepest order of things has enormous implications pretty much for everything we do. So this story is one of the instances This is sort of a case study of a way in which a particular kind of mathematics mattered very much, because it became a fight over mathematical techniques that actually had implications far beyond the actual technical issues at hand. It became a broad struggle, I will argue, over the very shape of modernity. Okay, so back in the summer of 2012, not that long ago, I visited Rome because I was trying to pay a visit to Fort Borgo Santo Spirito. And I got off the metro, I walked by St. Peter's Square, and eventually I arrived at that building. And I have to say that it was a little bit of a letdown, because this looks nothing so much as in just a normal office building as many others in that part of Rome. But this commonplace appearance of Fort Borgo Santo Spirito, a very romantic name, it actually, for a very ordinary building, actually belies its actual significance, because this is the global headquarters of the Society of Jesus, commonly known as the Jesuit order, and it is one of the most influential organizations in the history of the West. Now, the reason I came there was because the global headquarters also houses the archives of the Society of Jesus, and I came to see a document there that is marked as folio 183 in manuscript FG 657, and it is a record of a meeting that took place on August 10, 1632, in the Collegio Romano. That is another center of Jesuit power. That is just a 30-minute walk away from the Borgo Santo Spirito on the other side of the Tiber. This is what the Collegio Romano looks like today. It is no longer belong to the society. It is simply a high school. But the basic architecture, this imposing architecture of the place, still remains. The meeting was attended by 5 men, and they were all dressed in the black robes that marked them as members of the Society of Jesus. And their names are practically anonymous to us, and in fact, they were anonymous in their day as well. They were Biederman, Rodriguez, Alvarado, Roscoe, and Fordinus, forgotten people who were anonymous in their own day as well. But their office, the office of these people, was far from anonymous, because these were the Revisors General of the Society of Jesus. And they were charged with pronouncing on the new ideas of the age. They were the ones who decided which doctrines could be taught in the society's school and which would be banned. Just to be clear, that was no small thing, because in 1632, when the revisers met, the Jesuit order, the Society of Jesus, had a veritable empire of learning. I have a map here because it's the only one I found. This doesn't even touch, this is not even, this is just a tiny, small fraction of the number of colleges that the Society of Jesus actually had at the time. They had 500, the Society of Jesus had 500 colleges, plus more than 100 seminaries. And most of them were in Europe, and here you see some of the more important ones in France and Western Germany and some others, but this is just a small sample. There were 500 of them. And they actually extended far beyond Europe. There was one in Nagasaki in Japan, and there was one in Lima in Peru. And all of them were under the authority of the revisers of the Society of Jesus. It was a global educational network that was controlled by the Society of Jesus. And it was, I think it was likely the greatest in the history certainly European history, perhaps a history of the world. The Jesuits today are still known as a great teaching order. They have 28 universities in the United States and many others overseas, but nothing compared to what they had back in the 17th century. And by their decision, with the flick of a pen, the revisers could decide what would be taught in each and every one of those colleges from all over Europe and from Japan to Peru. Whatever they decided there in Rome was then law. But it wasn't just, if you think about the influence the sway that the revisers had, it didn't even end there. It wasn't just that they decided what would be taught in the Jesuit school, because the Jesuits had enormous authority beyond their formal authority. That is, they were the leading intellectual order of the Catholic Church. Whatever they decided was enormously authoritative, influential, and it would be rare for a Catholic scholar, even if they were not necessarily under a Jesuit themselves, or a member or a teacher in one of their schools, to go against those decisions that were arrived at by the revisers of the Society of Jesus. And even Protestants, appreciated and respected what the revisers said. Protestants had no love for the Jesuits, none whatsoever. But nevertheless, if the revisers of the Society of Jesus came to a decision, came to a conclusion, they would pay attention as well, because they knew that the Jesuit colleges and what was taught in them was the top of the line, was the very, very best, the most up-to-date, the most philosophically rigorous of anything that was available, whether Catholic or whether Protestant. So much so that even Sir Francis Bacon, who was Lord Chancellor of England, a Protestant, despised the Jesuit in every respect, but when it came to their colleges, he said, "They are so good, we wish they were ours." So you can see that what was decided, those 5 anonymous men who met that day in Rome, what they decided would have enormous impact. I mean, effectively, they could decide about an idea, about a doctrine, whether it will thrive or whether it would wither. If they approved it, it would be taught in their colleges. It would get the seal of approval of the Society of Jesus. If they did not, if they disallowed it, then it would most likely be forgotten and wither away. Now, this is a document in August 1632 that they were charged with passing judgment on the following proposition. This is the document. I guess you can't really read it from the projection. But this is the document that I went to see in that day in 2012. It is titled Judicium Decompositione Continui ex Indivisibilibus. That is a judgment on the composition of the continuum out of indivisibles. And it says it has been forwarded to us by a professor of philosophy the following doctrine. And this is what it said: the permanent continuum can be constituted solely of physical indivisibles or atomic corpuscles having mathematical parts identified with them. Therefore, the said corpuscles can be actually distinguished from each other. So this is this kind of Aristotelian Aristotelian philosophical jargon. But the basic idea here is basically that the continuum is composed of indivisible parts. that is a line is made up of points, or a surface is made up of lines, and so forth. And really, why not, right? Everything in the world is made of something, right? It's like a piece of wood. This wood is made of fibers, and a string is made of thread. Everything is made up of something, is made up of components. So why not the most general thing of all, the most abstract thing of all, which is the continuum, itself? It seems intuitive. It seems likely. It seems plausible. And yet, the revisers came to a different conclusion. And those are the documents has one paragraph. This is the proposition, and then he says, this is the decision of the revisers. We consider this proposition to be not only repugnant to the common doctrine of Aristotle, but that it is by itself improbable and is disapproved and forbidden in our society. Okay, so no go. And once they made their ruling, an elaborate machinery of enforcement kicked into gear. This doctrine has been disallowed. So the Collegio Romano was the epicenter of this great empire of learning, and letters went out to all the different. Basically, it went out to the leaders, to the provincial leaders, to the provincial superiors, and then they disseminated it to each and every one of the colleges, who then disseminated it to each and every one of their teachers to know that this doctrine is not allowed. Okay, and every instructor at every one of the hundreds of Jesuit schools knew that. Catholics everywhere took notice because of the authority of the Jesuits. And as we have seen, even beyond the Catholic world, this judgment was taken extremely seriously. So it seemed doctrine that the continuum is composed of separate indivisibles had suffered a seemingly mortal blow. But that does raise a question. I mean, the question is, of course, why did they care? Right? Why did the Jesuit really care? Of all things, whether a line is composed of points. I mean, I don't think any one of us has really given that a lot of thought, right? Whether a line is composed of points or a surface composed of line. And yet the Jesuits cared. They cared enough to pronounce on that officially. And it's not like there wasn't anything going on in 1632. I mean, here's just a sample of things that were going on right around the time that the Jesuits decided that their concern was with the line. So you have 30 Years' War going on, right, from 1618 to 1648. Not only that, in Germany, the Swedish king, Gustavus Adolphus, had invaded Germany and swept all the Catholic forces before him. Up to that point, the Catholics have been dominating, and suddenly, and with Gustavus Adolphus, that Swedish intervention, suddenly the tables were turned. A series of battles. You see the Battle of Breitenfeld up there, in which the Swedish army defeaed Count Tilly, the imperial general, and swept into southern Germany. The Catholic heartland of Germany was now open to those Protestant marauders. And just a couple of months before, there was another battle that once again the Swedes dominated. So it was a crisis. It was a crisis, and a crisis for the Jesuits in particular, because wherever the Swedes and their allies, the Saxons, went, the first thing they did, they ransacked all the Jesuits' houses, the Jesuit colleges. They sent all the learned fathers flying. Meanwhile, in Rome, there was a crisis, because this is Cardinal Gaspar Borgia, who challenged the Pope, Urban VIII, about his policies, and called on him to stand for the to like a trumpet to call on the believers like the trumpet of heaven, instead of his more lenient and liberal policies. And that was a crisis for the papacy. Meanwhile, 1632 is also the year that Galileo published its most famous and controversial work, the Dialogue on the Two Chief Systems of the World. He had been denounced for it. He had been summoned to Rome, leading the very next year to his condemnation, to his trial and condemnation. And the Jesuits were involved in all of these, in all of these things. And yet they decided that their main concern was, what is the line made of? Okay. So the question is why they cared. They're a religious order concerned with the saving of souls, and yet this is what they focus on. So to understand why the Jesuits cared about mathematics, we really need to kind of go just a little bit further back a century back to the chaotic days of the Reformation. And the Reformation was, for the Catholic Church, an unmitigated catastrophe. If you were looking at the Christian world, at Christendom, let's say in the year 1540, you'd probably think that the Catholic Church was really on its way out, losing province after province after province, kingdom after kingdom. And in fact, it wasn't just a religious crisis; it was also a political crisis, and it was also a profoundly an intellectual crisis, because the church was the foundation of the supporter and the basis of knowledge. It was the supporter and the basis of authority. And suddenly, that one unified voice that was guaranteed by the Catholic Church and ultimately by the Pope was being challenged from all directions, and the Church seemed to be thrust into this irreversible retreat. Now, in 1540, however, there was something happened that had an immense consequences for the Reformation, which was the foundation of the Society of Jesus. In that year, Ignatius of Loyola, a former soldier, he and 10 priests presented themselves to the Pope and asked to be recognized as a new order that would be explicitly and uniquely devoted to the Pope and to spreading the world and the truth of the Catholic Church to all lands. Pope Paul III was initially a little skeptical, but he thought the situation was dire and the risk was minimal, such a small group, and he granted their request, and this became the Society of Jesus. Initially, he limited the size of the order to only 60 members, but they soon surpassed it many times over. So the Jesuits, as they came to be known, were the Roman Church's answer to this crisis. They were an order that was structured like an elite military unit. It was hierarchic, it was streamlined, and it worked like this efficient machine. Their goal was to do battle against the heretics, reverse the fortunes of the church, and retake the lands lost to Rome. And in place of the chaos and confusion that reigned in the land of Christendom, they will bring order. They would establish the truth, meaning the truth of the Catholic Church. They would establish hierarchy. Once again, the hierarchy of the church that in itself guarantees the other social hierarchies, the political hierarchies and the social hierarchies, and ultimately establish order. And for that purpose, they themselves were also organized in precisely that way. They were hierarchical. They were strictly hierarchical, and they were truly an elite. They were truly an elite force. Unlike if you wanted to become a member of any other order in the church, say a Dominican or a Benedictine or any or a Capuchin or any other order, that meant you had to go through a novitiate of a year or two, and then, assuming you didn't mess up too badly, you would be admitted into the order. Now, to become a Jesuit was an entirely different matter. To become a fully formed Jesuit, a full member of the Jesuit, could take 8 years, could take 14 years. As we will see in some cases, it could take 20 years. 20 years in which of the most rigorous training, of the most demanding exploits, which would send you to any part of the world to follow the orders of your superiors. Obedience for the Jesuits was not something that was imposed from the outside. It was a high ideal. So when a Jesuit obeyed the command of their superiors, it was not even against their better judgment. It was not doing that because they were forced to do so. It was doing that because that is what a Jesuit does. It was the way it was a self-affirmation for them to be true Jesuits. And their method was, if I don't want to just look, this is, I think this picture, this is by Peter Paul Rubens. This is a painting that was commissioned for a campaign to canonize St. Ignatius of Loyola. And as you see, there are the suffering masses below, confusion and suffering reigns. There are the angels above and in the middle. There is Ignatius and all the Jesuits, his followers, blessing the people and bringing peace and order to the instead of their confusion and suffering. That is, they stand above the people and they bring proper order into this confusion that reigns in the world. Their method was to establish the correct doctrine based on the best available knowledge of their day. They were absolutely up to date in the in the latest and most up-to-date teachings, and then disseminating it through their vast network of colleges that encompassed the globe. And the assumption was that faced with this unstoppable onslaught of truth, the heretics, the doubters, would simply wither away. And the fact is that the Jesuits were right, remarkably. They were absolutely right because they were remarkably successful. Here's just a few. This is the growth of the Society of Jesus over the first few centuries. From 10 members in 1540, when Ignatius was presented his appeal to the Pope, 16 years later, the membership rose by a factor of 100, and there are already 33 colleges. 1626, which is close to the date we're talking about, we already have 444 colleges, and a century later, there are even more. So it was. They were a dynamic. They were an explosive. This is a sign of their explosive growth, and they were enormously powerful and influential. And in fact, they succeeded in wresting back many territories that have been lost to the church or seem like they would be lost to the church, including entire kingdoms like Poland and Hungary. Everywhere they went, everywhere they established colleges, Catholicism was reinvigorated and revived, and all the elites were fighting to send their children to be educated by the Jesuits. Now, initially, mathematics was a very minor part of this enterprise, and why not? I mean, this is about Catholicism, but about theology. But But that changed thanks to the lonely campaign of one man, really, which is this man here, Christopher Clavius, who was professor of geometry at the Collegio Romano. Clavius was a member of the, okay, we'll skip ahead a little bit here. Clavius took part in the Gregorian reform, that is the reform of the calendar by Pope Gregory XIII. And that was a great victory for the church. Why was it a great victory for the church? Because there was the Pope acting as an actual master of time, actually deciding when the year will begin, when the year will end, when the festivals were. And that was something that no Protestant was in a position to challenge. No Protestant was in a position to make such pronouncement that had such power. All of the debates between Catholics and Protestants, they all went on, and they were all inconclusive. But here, in the case of the calendar, this was a clearly unambiguous victory for the Catholic Church. The Pope himself would rule time in a way that even Protestants could not deny. Now Clavius, who was a member of this committee, and actually that boosted his career greatly, he believed that he knew why. He knew why this was a decisive victory for the Catholic Church in a way that no other debate could be. And the reason he believed was that this was mathematical. Okay? Mathematics was not, when it comes to mathematics, there is no debate. People can argue on and on and on about the nature of the Eucharist and justification by faith and so on, but when it comes to mathematics, there is only one true solution. And therefore, and that is why even the Protestants would have to concede the power and the truth of the teachings, of the pronouncements of the Pope. Consequently, mathematics, and particularly Euclidean geometry, should be the keystone, he believed, the keystone of Jesuit learning. Geometry is the field where all arguments come to an end. Okay? It is simply built from general postulates, and step by step proves the point in a way that no rational person can possibly deny. Okay? And there is no argument. And there is no argument. What we need is to make that the centerpiece of Jesuit learning, and then all other fields could follow the example of mathematics, and particularly Euclidean geometry, and then that will effectively guarantee the victory of the Catholic Church. Even once theology was cast in the same way as Euclidean geometry, the Protestants will just have to throw up their hands, just as they did when it came to the calendar. Geometry was the model of truth, hierarchy, and order, all of which they wanted to establish in the world. Okay, so that was Clavius's mission. He published many books, including his edition of Euclid, enormously popular. And he succeeded. He made the Jesuits a mathematical powerhouse. Okay, and some of the greatest mathematicians from a field that was completely marginal in their teachings, he really managed to make it a central piece of their teaching and make the Jesuits authorities in the field of mathematics. But just as they were getting started, just as they were getting going with establishing the authority of Euclid and all the Jesuit teachings, just like all the Catholic teaching, just like it, there was a new mathematical method that was gaining traction. And that mathematical method seemed to undermine everything that they had claimed for mathematics. And this was the method of indivisibles. And here are some, these are the main leaders in Italy of the Italian mathematics, indivisibilist tradition. There's Galileo himself and Cavalieri and Torricelli, who were both his students. And the method was powerful and effective. And just to give a quick example, I mean, I'm sure many of you probably know this. Just a quick comparison about a very simple theorem and how it would be proven by Euclid versus how it would be proven by an indivisibilist. In this case, Cavalieri. Okay, so you have a parallelogram AFBC, and then there is a diagonal FC, and the question is to prove that this triangle is equal to that triangle. Now that is, you know, if they're good Euclidean, that is trivial, right? I mean, that is very, it follows immediately because they share, those two triangles share one base, and then this angle BCN is equal to HFT, and this angle is equal to that angle, and therefore those triangles are congruent, and therefore they're equal, right? No problem, right? And of course Cavalieri knew that. You know, there's no question that he knew that. That's trivial. But that's not what but he went about proving it. That's not what he did. Okay? He didn't just want to know that it was logically necessary for those two triangles to be equal, because otherwise it would lead to a contradiction. He wanted to know why. Why are those triangles equal? And to do that, he said that each one of these triangles, the area of each triangle is made up of parallel lines. Okay, the surface of this triangle here, CFA, is made up of lines like BN, another one here, another one here, another one here, all parallel to each other, until you have all those lines making up those are the lines that make up this triangle. And you have, and the same is true of the other triangle, FCD, right? It's also made up of lines. But for each line here, there's an equivalent line here. And line here, there's an equivalent line here. Line there, there's an equivalent line there. And therefore, once you add each line in one has an equivalent in the other. You add them all up, you get the same thing. You get the same area. That was his argument. Okay, so it seems intuitively right, and Cavalieri said this is just like the threads, the strings that make up a thread. So it's just the same, just one after the other, one parallel to the other, right? So that make it up. But there were of course problems with infinitesimals, and that is that infinitesimals are very intuitively persuasive. They're very effective. They're very powerful, not for proving things that are much more complicated than that, but they're also completely wrong. And they knew it was wrong. Everybody knew it was wrong, completely wrong. Why? Because it leads to paradoxes. And that was known since antiquity, that this idea that you can take a continuum and divide it into a surface into lines, a line into point, leads to paradoxes. They're usually given, usually presented as the paradoxes of Zeno. But the basic idea is very simple. If you take a line and say it's made up of points, and you have to decide, okay, is there a finite number or an infinite number? And if there's a finite number, then then you can always divide it further. So it's not really, though the points aren't there. There is no indivisible. The indivisibles can be broken. If there's an infinite number, well, then either if they have a magnitude, they will result in infinite magnitude, right? Not the original line. If they have no magnitude 0, it doesn't matter how many times you add them, they arrive at 0. And you still get 0. So they were wrong. They were known to be wrong. They were paradoxical, and they could easily lead a mathematician astray. This is one paradox that, if I had time, I would go over. But it's very easy to go astray and to get really ridiculous results from this assumption, as was well known. In other words, this method that was gaining ground so rapidly in Europe, and that by people like Salieri and Torricelli and Angeli, and also in Northern Europe, it was everything that the Jesuits believed that mathematics must never be. So instead of constructing the material world from mathematical principles, it did the other way, right? The whole point of the Jesuits was we take this beautiful Euclidean construct, this rigorous, rational, orderly construct, and you impose it on the world. This does the exact opposite. This does the exact opposite, right? It takes this worldly intuition that a surface is made up of lines, or like a piece of thread. It's a materialist intuition that is not based on any kind of rigorous assumptions and so on. Just a materialist intuition, and it turns that into mathematics. If Euclidean mathematics is top-down, starts with simple assumption, and then makes the world follow from the world, the rational, reasonable, regular world follows from that, this is the opposite. It takes all of the confusion of the material world and brings it into mathematics. Whereas geometry is perfectly ordered, rational and logical, indivisibles are chaotic and paradoxical. They have a mistake at their very heart. And they're just as likely, they might be useful and lead to truth, they're just as likely to lead to mistakes, to errors. And it's very easy to show, it's very easy to show how. So instead of restoring the proper, rational, inevitable, undeniable, incontrovertible, unchallengeable truths and hierarchies in the world, they do the opposite. They bring all the chaos and confusion of the world and say, this is mathematics. Okay? So if you think about the miracles of St. Ignatius, Ignatius is imposing order, peace upon the world. This takes the confusion in the world and says, this is now mathematics. And instead of truth, hierarchy, and order, this new mathematics brought error, subversion, and chaos. It is everything that mathematics must never be. And it doesn't only undermine the purposes of Jesuit mathematics, it suggests that their entire project is pointless. Because if mathematics, that model that they set up, here we can know things for sure. Here we can know things that are absolutely true and undeniable. If that model is, it turns out mathematics is none of those things. Mathematics is just as ambiguous, just as error-prone, just as paradox-prone as anything else, then their whole project of establishing rational, necessary, unchallengeable order in the world through the model of Euclidean geometry is doomed. So this is a very critical thing for the Jesuits. The challenge of indivisibles is a challenge to their whole project of reestablishing truth, hierarchy, and order, and ultimately the authority of the church. So what the Jesuits do, they decided, well, what do you do with, what did the Jesuits do when there was some doctrine that they didn't like or thought was dangerous? They set up to suppress them, shut them down. And that is precisely what they did. They did it through actions like the Revisors Decree of 1632. That decree was repeated every few years. There were actually precedents even before 1632, and then it was repeated year after year. There are letters by the superior general of the society, the commander. He engaged himself in writing to different provinces where he heard that there was maybe somebody there that was teaching this erroneous doctrine. He wrote to them and said, shut that down right away. And when it came to other mathematicians who were promoting this, the Jesuits launched this mathematical campaign. They charged their own mathematician with refuting this doctrine and undermining the authority of mathematicians who promoted it, and as much as they could, suppressed any publication that was related. Those people did not get jobs. Those people did not publish. We know they existed only through their correspondence. And to put things in a few words, by the last third of the 17th century, there are no more indivisibilists in Italy. Italy is where the Jesuits were strongest. And they, indeed, the method of indivisible was founded in Italy. It was founded by Galileo and his students and their students. And by the last third of the 17th century, they had succeeded in completely eradicating them. Now, as we know, the method of indivisibles was promoted elsewhere and became the foundation of the calculus, but not in Italy. Not in Italy, where the Jesuits kept watch. All right, so this was what mathematics presented for the Jesuits: truth, hierarchy and order, irrevocable, unchallengeable, that they believed that they could use to establish the absolute, necessary, irrevocable, unchallengeable authority of the church. Now, an interesting counterpoint to this story is a story that took place in England, not long after the events that we described today. I write about it in my book. I will not go into it in detail here. I think I've already used up enough time. But let me just the general outlines here. So this comes English Civil War, 1640, 1660, and this is the background to Thomas Hobbes proposing making his proposal, his philosophical proposal for establishing a state, a commonwealth that will not suffer, that will never descend into such chaos, into what he called the war of all against all. As I'm sure most of you know, he summed up his theories in his work, The Leviathan. There you have the Leviathan presiding, the Leviathan who encompasses, in his person, contains the will of all the people of the Commonwealth and presides over the land in absolute, unlimited power and authority. And the interesting thing about Hobbes is that Hobbes loved geometry. Hobbes founded his philosophical system on geometry. And the Leviathan, as you may know, is in fact structured in the structure, in principle, as a Euclidean proof, starting from the very simplest ideas about points and lines, and all the way up to the proper structure of the Commonwealth. According to Hobbes, Hobbes believed that he had proved it with the same absolute certainty of a Euclidean proofs, and the kind of state that he proposed also had laws that had the authority of Euclidean proofs. In the state of the Leviathan state, it wasn't just that dissent was discouraged; dissent was literally, logically impossible. It's like if you cannot say if the Leviathan already contains your own will, then whatever the Leviathan chooses is your will. There is no way to deny that. So, that has it has the absolute authority of a Euclidean proof. Now in England, his enemy, his personal and ideological enemy, among others, was John Wallis and his fellows of the Royal Society, who believed that the Civil War was caused not because there was not enough repression, but because there was too much repression. And they believed in a more pluralistic, no, not pluralistic in our modern sense, but more pluralistic than was allowed at the time, and a way of people from different opinions to find common ground and come together. The problem with that was with mathematics. What do you do with mathematics? Right? Mathematics, as Hobbes knew, as the Jesuits knew, is not a matter of negotiating and coming to a compromise, either right or it's wrong, right? But Wallace actually, he proposed a kind of mathematics that was negotiable. And the key for him was indeed indivisibles or infinitesimals. That was the key for him. He welcomed the ambiguities of infinitesimal. He welcomed the fact that there was nothing that was absolutely certain, irrevocable, but that you could talk about it, and the standard of proof was not this kind of tyrannical force of a Euclidean proof, but the general agreement of mathematicians. And in England, unlike in Italy, those views prevailed. So we have here. So we have here in England, there were competing views of proper mathematics and also of the proper political arrangement. You have the Leviathan on one state, and on the other you have a meeting of the House of Commons, which, despite its limitation, is a deliberative body in which people can discuss and come to a compromise. And in Italy, and in fact, and in England, those views ultimately prevailed. And that had consequences. There are many reasons why Italy, the land of the Renaissance, fell into such such a funk, for the next several centuries. But I would say one of them was this victory of the Jesuits. This victory of the Jesuits and their ability to suppress dissent. And turn into this kind of intellectual dogmatism and authoritarian stagnation, whereas in England, Wallace's and the Royal Society's vision won out, and parliamentary system won over absolutism. Now, I'm not saying that was the only reason. What I am saying is that this abstract debate, this very technical debate over whether there are points in a line, whether a line is made up of points, was one of those places where those two visions of modernity clashed. One which saw modernity as this absolutely authoritarian, rational, in which absolute, irrevocable truth prevailed. And you can put here, in this case, you can put the Jesuits and Hobbes in this same camp, authoritarian, hierarchical, necessary, true, versus a more relative, more pluralism of opinion, less dogmatism, relative religious toleration over suppression of dissent, and ultimately, as we know, England became what is really the first modern state. So I think this little abstract technical debate actually was about far greater things, and who prevailed had far greater impact. So yes, mathematics matters. It matters in surprising ways, not just as a tool for building cell phones and cars and so on, but also in the way we order our world. And the Jesuits and the Indivisibilists, on one, Hobbes and Wallace, they ordered the world in very, very different ways, and that had consequences for how they thought the world should be run, how society should be ordered, how the state should be ordered, and yes, I believe mathematics matters. Thank you.